everybody. We're at the Imp and the Ogre. My name's Paul.
This is Ryan.
And this week we are talking about the Mad God's Key.
Yeah, the Mad God's Key by Jason Bulmahn. This is a D&D adventure, a 3.5 edition for low-level PCs. I don't remember specifically.
1 to 5.
1 to 5, there you go. Originally published in Dungeon Magazine 114 in 2004.
Yeah. Quick synopsis for you guys. So, an old emperor made a key that could open any lock in Greyhawk. The key was found by a locksmith eventually, who gained attention by the cult of Vecna, who wanted this key to open up a sealed book. They convinced some thugs to steal it for them. They beat up the locksmith. They take the key. They take the book.
It's not an emperor. It's the great archmage Zagig Yurgurni, which is Ernie Gary Gygax backwards, right? Right. It's the archmage of Greyhawk.
Nice.
The great Gary Gygax, spelt backwards. So general impressions, I really like the pacing of this adventure, right? Multiple locations, so it's a bit of an investigation and chase to a certain extent, right? You're trying to recover this key, right? So it has a nice combination of combat encounters and RP style encounters, right? Some of the encounters are totally just done in character. You don't have to fight anybody, which is nice. So there's a good bit of everything. There's nice logical connections between the different components of it, right? Sometimes in adventures I find that we go do this, and then suddenly we're in a swamp because we wanted to do a swamp dungeon, and then, you know what would be cool? Let's go to the desert. Red Hand of Doom kind of springs to mind in that type of context, whereas this, it makes perfect sense for all of these locations to exist.
I agree. Yeah, it was pretty thematically pleasing. There was only one part, the interlude part of the adventure, where I thought maybe your PCs could get a little lost or maybe not know where to go for information, but otherwise I felt like all the dots connected pretty well in this one.
And I did like that it didn't feel too railroady. You know, for a lot of investigative based adventures kind to just force you to follow the trail, whereas it's like you said, it's entirely possible for your PCs to maybe get a little sidetracked to a certain extent, but the hints are pretty straightforward, and I didn't feel like you were forcing them along this particular path. And there's a couple of encounters that there's no real timeline to, like they might investigate one lead and then another lead, and they kind of feed into each other. It feels like you're unfolding the mystery, right? Like it starts off as a very, as we'll see, just a very simple sort of stumble across a crime in progress, and then as you sort of peel back the different layers, it gets more and more complex and interesting, and then as we wrap things up, it spirals into potential plot hooks to future adventures, which I always appreciate.
Yeah, this is one of those ones that you could kind of have in your back pocket all the time and just plop the hook any point you want. Your PCs could pick it up or not. Like if you thought people were getting bored of doing your main campaign and they're in the city, you could just plop this in there and then send them on another mini adventure to go investigate, and whether they do or not.
Oh, you could easily have this as, you know, the instigating encounter is just a random encounter for any urban campaign, period. Right?
Yeah.
This is one of those adventures that there's no real pressing timeline on it, so you could easily just interject it whenever you wanted to.
So Hook, it doesn't matter how your PCs are there; they're just supposed to be in Greyhawk.
Or any city.
Yeah. And you, like Ryan said it just a moment ago, you just kind of stumble across a looted locksmith shop, or shop, whatever you want it to be. There's a couple of thugs that are still there. You can kind of just dispose of them, mini combat encounter, and then get information about who sent them there, why they're there, and then you find out that it was this orc Iron Tusk, which is your first breadcrumb.
So it's an in media res, as they res or whatever they call when you start right in the middle of things. I thought the hook was fine. The only issue I would have with this hook is it kind of assumes that the PCs are already working together, right? Because otherwise you're a bunch of random strangers that all show up to the same location at the same time and then decide to work together, which is super weird. So if you're using this right from like level 1, you'd probably want to have them already as a unit for some reason.
You could just make them like the investigating cops.
Yeah, I think you could be cops, or you could just have it, that they already have a mini mission, right? Like you could have them already on a quest and they need to go, visit a merchant somewhere, and this is like next door to the merchant. So you can sort of do it that way. But otherwise, I think it would be a little clunky. A bunch of random adventurers happen to be at the same place at the same time.
Now, the only thing that I didn't like about this like opening sequence is that it just seems so unbelievable to me that the locksmith that owns a key that can open any lock ever just leaves it at his shop at night. It seems like something that you just wear around your neck all of the time. So I think I would maybe want to change this a bit to where you find like the beaten up locksmith that was opening his shop for the day and he's been robbed.
Yeah, I think that could work. Or maybe you find him inside, right? Because some of it's a little wonky, because the people that you find robbing the locksmith shop aren't the same people that stole the key, right? They are friends of the person who stole the key, who just told them like, hey, if you show up at this time, you can probably score some sweet loot, type of deal. So that gets a little wonky. And because those two guys, or people, I don't remember what their sexes were, are your tie to Iron Tusk. If you don't have them in there, then it's a bit confusing. But yeah, I agree with your idea there, but you'd have to tweak with things a little bit for it to make sense, if you wanted to change it up that way. But yeah, you make a good point that if you have the super powerful artifact, why would it just be,
it's like what he got famous for, right? Was being able to unlock any lock that people brought to him, and it's like, we'll just leave it under the counter when I go home. I don't know if that's realistic, but anyway, it's a game. So after defeating or interrogating the guys that are there, they'll tell you that Iron Tusk can be found at the barge where he works, basically.
Works at the wharfs.
Yeah, so you can head down to the wharfs, and I think maybe one of my most favorite chase scenes that we've done is this chase scene.
It's pretty great.
Yeah. I think you can just kind of ask around or kind of get his attention at some point, or just have a chance of seeing him working.
Well, if I recall correctly, he's actually hired a couple of other people in the area to keep an eye out for him. So if the PCs show up and start asking around, I think it's a halfling or something, and we'll sort of yell, hey, Iron Tusk, the cops are here, right? And then he'll start to run. And what's cool about this is it's a chase scene that exists over a bunch of floating boats, basically, right? So it's a bunch of sort of like floating market. It's like a floating market and / import-export type of thing. So there's a bunch of barges and boats, and it's a chase across all of these floating platforms, which is pretty cool. I don't know if you wanted to.
Well, they provided a random barge table for you to roll off, and so each boat that you enter can be a random assortment of things, ranging from a boat with loose fishing nets on it, where your speed is half, to chickens that explode in feathers and slow you down, and rotten fruit and junk heaps and spiders on them, and watchdogs and drunken sailors that try and attack you as you run by. So you've got this. You could do this 10 times over and not run into the same events 10 times over, which I thought was neat. And I also like that there was like an end point, like on the map, there was a point where he could get away, and that wasn't, it wasn't a guaranteed success, right? So you could fail at this in the chase scene.
Each of these random barges basically has a skill challenge associated with it. So if you fail the skill challenge, you are held up and you slow down. If you succeed it, you can continue to catch up, and it's sort of it's basically just an extended series of skill challenges that are done really, really well. And this is how I think a good chase is done, And I know you can even like buy chase decks. Like I know Paizo sells them, and I'm sure other companies do, and there's probably lots of independently produced ones out there on the internet. But basically, the ones I've seen, it's like a deck of cards, and it's set for different environments. So you're going to have a chase. You shuffle your cards. You draw like 6 of them, and then you flip it over, and it's just like a skill challenge. And if you pass, you lose distance. If you succeed, you gain distance, and then whether or not you can do it. And I think it's a really good way of using skills. And I don't know that it gets done that way enough, right? And I think this is sort of in the weeds a little bit, but I think this is the type of skill challenges that 4th edition hoped to have. But in 4th edition, it was always sort of presented as you need to convince the council to agree with you. To do so, you need to get 4 successes before you get 6 failures or something like that, without actually outlining the skill challenges. And I think that's where a lot of the hate for 4th edition skills comes from. Because if you outline it something like this, because this is an engaging chase scene, which realistically, if you fail like 3 times, you're going to lose, right? But if I'd written this and just said, here's the chase scene, here are the skill challenges, you need to get 4 successes before 3 failures, it's boo, that's no fun.
Right.
But when you have it like, okay, you jump on the first boat, it is a roll the dice. It's a fishing scow, and there's tons of slimy fish on there. You start to slip and slide around, everybody make a acrobatics check. Right? And everyone's like, oh, okay, this totally makes sense. You're really engaged in the process, and you can have some players fall over and some make it.
Well, that's what's good about that too, if it's not so cumulative. It's like one person might succeede on and then it's all of a sudden up to you to catch the guy, and everyone else is cheering you on as well. Like, come on, get him.
So it's well done, and I think this type of thing is not the only time I've ever seen this sort of setup, but these kinds of dynamic skill-based challenges should be sort of the gold standard for skill thing. And you can do them for anything. You're escaping a burning building, or running. Consider it sort of like Indiana Jones when he's trying to escape the temple at the first movie, right? The Raiders of the Lost Ark. So there's all the traps, and he's jumping over things, and he's got to swing across whatchamahoo's as the dungeon collapses around it. That's effectively a series of skill challenges, and I think you should use them more in adventures. So big plus on this type of encounter.
And then, so after all this fun, one of the things that I liked least about this adventure is that conveniently Iron Tusk has a map with an arrow pointing to the place where the Green Dagger hideout is, because he couldn't remember where it was, so he drew himself a map.
I will say,
like, there's some charm in it, but
there's a lot of things in this adventure that are set up so if you happen to kill the informant, they have information on it. Like, I can't even remember if those original 2 goons, if one of them had like a note on them from Iron Tusk. I seem to think, now that you mention it, one of them probably did. Right?
Iron Tusk, where does he work?
Or be at this place for some sweet loot. Summoned Iron Tusk. Like, it seems a bit cheesy, but I understand why it's in there, because it's redundancy for an investigation, right? Because it is kind of silly, but otherwise, you kill Iron Tusk and the adventure's over, right?
But like, you could do it so much simply. Like, find, I don't know, what are they called? The Green Daggers. Have him have like an emblem of the Green Daggers, so that you need that to gain access to the Green Dagger cult. And it's like, okay, so you find that, and like, take it to some local lore master that can say, oh yeah, that's the thing, they usually hang out in this area. It's like, that's not that much of an extra step to make it a little bit more believable.
I will say, you are putting a lot of faith in your players, right? That, like, yes, you could absolutely have him have a money pouch on him that has a distinctive seal on it, and you think you might have seen this before, and your players are like, cool, money, we're done, yay, right? Versus you have something as ridiculous as like, map to secret hideout, arrow, go here. They're likely to follow it. So yeah, it's a bit on the nose, but I understand why the author did it this way. If knowing your players better, then yes, you can fine tune it to be a little less
I guess there is nothing more annoying than like leaving a clue for your players and then nobody picking up on it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like, and then they're like, "Oh, well, we didn't know," and it's like, "Well, like it was there the whole time. You just had to ask."
Yeah, I dislike, I personally dislike the letter info dump aspect of it, but that's why it's there, because when you tell your players you find a letter, they'll read the letter, versus you find this unusual shaped stick and they're like, how much is it worth?
Yeah.
Right? Like it's not about like, oh, we should try to figure out what this means, and it actually, oh, this is something carried by members of this cult. It's like, no, it's made out of brass. You can get 5 gold pieces for it. They're like, done.
Yeah. Yeah. So then,
okay. Before we go on, just there is one thing here though, is getting back to talking about the adventure being over. If he escapes, the adventure is basically over.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
I guess you could like try and track him down again, but just like play the scene over again or in a different spot. But I think there's like it's okay to have an aspect of losing, especially if this isn't your only adventure that you're running for the day. Like that's why it might fit nicely into the pocket of another adventure, because if they fail, then it's over, and you can just later on play out that some disease ran over a rogue's guild or whatever, right? I think it's okay to lose sometimes if there's a backup plan.
Oh, I'm totally fine with it, but like there's a lot of redundancy built in to prevent complete failure, right? And this is one of those situations that if your players just roll terribly in the chase sequence, he gets on a boat, he sails away, I think he goes to his flop house, and within 24 hours he leaves the city. So it really puts a time pressure on it, and then trying to actually track this person down in a metropolis, because it's in the city of Greyhawk, which is the greatest city in the land type of thing, becomes a lot more complicated. Now that being said, you could always just have it that like your players might remember that a halfling shouted for warning, and then you can go track that person down and shake them down if they didn't flee the crime scene, and so on and so forth. But I agree with the sentiment that sometimes it's okay to lose. Mm-hmm. And then maybe your players won't dump all their non-combat stats in the future. So.
Yeah. So if you do succeed in capturing Green Tusk, I think he's difficult to interrogate, but you can kind of just like rough him up and find the note.
You can get the information from him.
You find out that
dead or alive.
He was hired by the Green Dagger hideout clan.
Gang. Gang's the word you're looking for.
Yeah.
The GDG, yo.
Yeah. So then next logical place to go would be the Green Dagger hideout. And I don't know if up to this point you don't know about the poison, right?
The disease? You don't know about any of this stuff?
So you come to this mostly abandoned
Thieves Guild.
Guild, yeah. And the first encounter that you run into here was one that I actually quite enjoyed. You once you get in, I think, through locked door or whatever it is, I think it was pretty simple. But you encounter a bunch of sick members of the guild. Yeah. And they're blind and sickly, and they only attack if attacked. So it's kind of like a check for your PC is really to see how evil they are at this point. And they can provide information to you about how everyone got sick and that they're asking for help. And I thought this was nice that it's not just a combat encounter. You can play it different ways, and there's multiple outcomes for it. So
yeah, it's a nice little dungeon. So I liked the layout. I liked a lot of it. I liked what you said there with lots of non-combat encounters that you don't have to murder everybody. I will say there's there's several sort of random weird encounters in here that don't really fit, right? There's Sturges because
they're everywhere.
A low-level D&D adventure needs blood-sucking giant mosquitoes.
From having read like multiple adventures now and done Sturges is like the number one if you don't know what to put in here, or like if you need a pet to defend your lair, you just put Sturges in.
It's probably we've done 30 plus adventures as part of this, and I'd say at least a half dozen of them.
Yeah,
almost all of the first level adventures have had Sturges in them. I guess they're just super iconic. So yeah. I thought that was a bit out of place. I think there's a giant spider.
There is, and the spider
there was a spider swarm. That's what it was.
The thing that I liked about the spider swarm, which is in a closet in the Thieves Guild, is that they've like put they've like tried to seal the door up with cloth and stuff around the edges so the spiders can't get out. And it's like, well, they could have just killed them maybe because there are like powerful things in here that you fight. But it's just I always like those little flavors.
Yeah, so it's neat. And I do think your players should feel really bad about picking a lot of the fights in here because you're dealing with very obviously ill individuals. Now, eventually, you will reach a point where you get to the boss, quote unquote.
Mini boss and then boss.
Oh, yes, is the
Chamber of Veils, which is you fight the twins or whatever that have all there's like cloth draped around the room, which is why it would be there. I don't know. And they're twin rogues, I guess, that fight you, but they behave as one. So it was like, I thought it was kind of a mechanically interesting fight where you would attack with one and then they would step behind a veil and then another one would appear behind a PC. So it was like the illusion that it was teleporting around.
Yeah.
But I also wrote it would probably be really annoying to keep track of, kind of. But so that's the mini boss of the dungeon.
Yeah, it's a neat adventure, a neat encounter for sure. And then there's the guild leader at the end. Cyrithus, I wrote his name down as, and I think this is like one of my favorite boss encounters, air quotes, that I've run into in the way that he prepares for someone coming into his lair, and that he's poured oil all over the room and using mage hand to hold a candle like above the oil. That was the first time we'd read about that, and a lot of things are used over and over again, so it's fun to see like something creative like that. Yeah, for sure. So again, this is one of those encounters that really should be resolved non-violently. I mean, ultimately what it comes down to is your players don't particularly have a beef with this guild, right? Like they may think they do, but they don't really do. And similarly, the thieves themselves don't necessarily have a beef with the PCs. It's more like you're invading the guild hall, we got to defend the guild hall type of idea. So I think with proper role playing, it's not outside of the possibility just to have most of this resolved non-violently.
And the only thing that I think could have been helpful in this adventure if it ever defined what they were poisoned or diseased with.
It's a disease. I can't remember what it is.
But it never, I don't think it ever defines it in the sense that if you had a cleric in your group.
Oh wait, maybe it is a poison that looks like a disease.
Yeah, but could a cleric cure them if you have that,
I think so, but
could your party help the guild?
Yeah, I can't, this is the thing, is I can't remember what level the appropriate spells are, clerical spells are. But yes, if you're at a cleric that could actually heal some of the illness, then yeah, you'd absolutely gain their help and trust really quickly. And this sort of ties into we'll get to the boss in a second here, I guess, but it's this the whole meta plot is a little convoluted to a certain extent, and this was one part of it that I found to be a little odd, because what actually happened, and I'm not even sure the PCs ever will find this out, right? Because there's no real way to directly find this out, but their priest of Vecna gave the guild the disease or poison or whatever. I can't remember. I wrote disease, but I can't remember if it actually was a disease. And then pretended to be a priest of Bokov, the magic god in the setting.
Yep.
And offered to heal them if they stole the key.
Yep.
Right. So, okay. So there's that. But the guild is now so sick that they can't actually steal the key. So they hire an independent contractor, Iron Tusk, to do it for them. So it doesn't even accomplish what the antagonist wanted, right? Because they end up having to outsource it to a less competent operator, if you will, instead of dealing with it themselves. So I found that all to be a little unfortunate.
Poor planning by the hirers.
Right, it didn't make a lot of sense to me. But that's, instead of just hiring the guild to do it, it's pretending to be who cares, right? Also, he is a priest. He could heal them.
Yeah.
right?
Others evil, It's a Vecna.
Yeah.
They want to spread pestilence.
Vecna's the god of secrets, like, or whatever, right? So I don't even know that this guy is evil, but as a cult, are they truly evil? They're like neutral evil, they're the milk toast evil, right? But anyway, so that's the whole idea behind it is, okay, you steal this item for me and I will cure you.
Mm-hmm.
And then he doesn't cure them. He gives them like a fake cure. Anyways, right? I just thought that there's a lot of levels of misdirection that have been put in place, but which makes sense. You're a priest of the god of secrets, then it should be convoluted. But from a planning standpoint, I'm like, this doesn't seem like it was a good idea.
There's easier ways.
Well, there's less setups that are more likely to succeed, I guess. Like when you're making the people that you're trying to hire to do a job for you deathly ill, they might not be super competent at what you're doing. Right? I mean, conversely, you could have just had like a bunch of like snotty-nosed and obviously sick people trying to rob.
Yeah.
As well, right? So I thought that was a bit much. But regardless,
like maybe it would have been better if in the opening encounter, if the roles were kind of reversed, if you ran into like sick thieves at the locksmith's place and someone had given Iron Tusk a note saying like, show up at this place at this time, you might find some loot. And then he like beat them up and stole the key and wasn't hired by them.
Yeah, well, then it starts to get, you're completely changing the adventure at that point. Like, it's a neat idea, right? But then Iron Tusk's the one who has the key, and then it cuts out a lot of the intermediate stuff. But if you're gonna go with the sick guild aspect of it, you would probably, what you could do is you could just run the encounter anyways, but like one of the people was too sick to get away.
Yeah.
And like passed out in the, in the actual locksmith shop. And if you're going to do that, you just cut out all the whole part with Iron Tusk, which would be a shame because the chase over the barges is one of the funner parts of the adventure. But yeah, there's probably ways that you could play up the ill thieves more. Because, and if you're using this as part of a greater campaign set in a city, you probably could put in some random little encounter where you come, somebody tries to pickpocket you, but you catch them because they sneeze or something like that to sort of foreshadow that there's a sick thieves guild in town. Yeah. Which, that's kind of a fun idea. Now the boss, quote unquote, this is the guild leader, is the only person in the entire guild that actually knows about the contract. Right, so he's the only person that's interacted with the priest of Bacab or whatever, and knows that they were hired and all of this type of stuff. So to find your next breadcrumb, you need to interact with the individual. Now, this can be done peacefully, right? Like there's no reason that you have to fight him. Though if you have a bunch of murder hobos, as some of us do, you can just find the information out of the guildmaster's diary, because like every good villain, they write everything down so the PCs that can find out their secrets, even if they kill them. But all you can find out from the guildmaster is that they were hired by a priest of Bacab, whatever, to steal the key. They don't have it anymore. The handoff has happened. They were given the cure to the disease. They don't know that the cure doesn't work or whatever. Yeah. This is all sort of happened within 24 hours of the theft type of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, this is the part where I think that like your players could get lost after the Green Dagger, because now you've just got information, right? That a priest of Bacab hired them and that a book was stolen. So
they don't know about the book being stolen yet, right? All they know at this point is that the priest of Bacab is the person who hired them to steal the key, and they have the key. So if you're following the key, your next lead is the Temple of Bacab, effectively.
Which you can go to and find out, you can talk to them, and eventually, I think if you make successful checks, one of the guys will admit that he was mugged at some point, and his robes and stuff were stolen.
Well, it's you show up, and it's a crime scene.
Yeah.
Right, that's the thing. When you show up to the temple, the city guard's there because there's been a break-in, and you can just sort of ask and be like, "Hey, what's going on here?" You know, and if you're not a dick about it, they will tell you that there was a robbery, and you can find out that a book was stolen. So the one thing I didn't care for this is you can ask for an audience with the priests or whatever, and they're like, "Okay, yeah, 1 second, it's a busy day." They put you in a waiting room, and eventually someone comes to talk to you. And this person just happens to have been the person in the only acolyte or priest or whoever it is in the entire temple that meets you randomly, happens to be the one that was mugged like 2 weeks ago or whatever, and his clothes were stolen.
Yeah,
which bugged me mostly because that's a little too convenient. Yeah, if you will. Right,
but it's like sort of runs into that dilemma. It's like you don't like railroads, but you don't like being too vague, and it's like this part seems like there's a lot of, if your PCs just don't know where to go or they don't know what to do, then they're just kind of stuck looking around, right? Like they need to find the stone pendant, which is the Cairn charm, which you do at the library.
As written, you get an audience. You talk to a random priest who happens to have been mugged and had his clothing stolen. And when he got into the tussle with the individual, he ripped off this pendant from his assailant. And that's your next clue, right? Which is partly fine. But the way I look at it is our assailant, right, our mastermind, has put a lot of levels of blah, blah, blah. I can't remember a good adjective now. He's tried to hide his true identity behind all of these different levels, right? He's pretended to be a priest, hired a guild who do it, right? He's not doing anything directly. Why would he leave this priest alive? Right? Like, if I changed anything, it would be that the person that he mugged was killed. Right, and you can still have like this pendant was found at the crime scene, right? Like you can still have that aspect of it, right? But you could maybe build it in more that you can find out that a member of the clergy was actually killed and robbed a week ago, and then you could go and talk to the city guard to find out information. And if you wanted to like create a relationship between the city guard and the PCs for like an ongoing campaign, I think it's a good opportunity to do that, because you could have a little side quest where they're like, I tell you what, I'm stuck on this case, you help me out, I'll help you out, and you could have some little side quest in there as well. But at the end of the day, they still get the pendant or information about the pendant without having to have it be quite so neatly tied up. Yeah, because that bugged me. Of all the things in here, I felt that was a little too, a little too softball, if you will. Right, like here it is, like so pointless to the point like why even have it in there? Right, like it didn't actually fit. I mean, in the greater meta plot, the idea is that the book that was stolen is associated. I guess that's the point to make is you can find out the book that was stolen is a book with a lock that can't be opened. Right. So now, if your players are smart, they'll start putting together the key that can open anything and the book that can't be opened. Yeah. Right. I know there might be some sort of connection there. Now, you could also theoretically have the fake priest not be a priest of Bakob and have the robbery at the temple be something completely unrelated that the PCs can find out from other mechanisms, right? Or you could even have it where it was a priest of some other, St. Cuthbert or whoever, right? Yeah. And then if you have it, one of our clergy was killed, Inspector blah, blah, blah was on the case. So you go to the City Watch to find Inspector Steve, and they're like, he just got called out. He's over at the Temple of Bakob. And then you go find the inspector, and he's working the case with the missing book, and then suddenly it doesn't seem so obvious anymore.
Right.
And you can start to bring it together, and maybe there was a priest of St. Cuthbert that was also seen on the premise, and you can start putting this together and make it.
So that's what I mean. Like, even if in our proposed solutions to like fixing this up, it's still a little convoluted, right?
Well,
like
it's
so is it a mystery adventure, or is it like a seek and find, right? Like it sort of loses its identity halfway between. It's like very linear, and you know where to go, and then all of a sudden it's just kind of but I guess maybe that could be the purpose of it too, is that like you can just lose the adventure at any point, right? Like if you can't figure it out at this point where to investigate, then
well, I mean, I think you have some flexibility in here, is you can just make it a very linear, you go here, you go here, you go here, you go here, you're done.
Yep.
Or you can try to branch it out, make it a little bit more web-like, which serves mostly in the way that you could make the city come a little bit more alive. So if you wanted your city setting to be a major component going forward, right? Like if you're running an mostly urban-based adventure, you could definitely tweak with this a little bit to introduce the PCs to a bunch of interesting NPCs, right? And they get connections with the City Watch and this church, and maybe they help out the guild, and now the guild owes them a favor, the Thieves Guild, right? So you can start to build connections with the locals, if you will, which then you could expand out into your campaign where you now have all of these people that that can serve as patrons or what have you. And I kind of like that type of approach because it feels a little less forced when you have random person coming to you for aid versus like you get a note from, prelate so-and-so who you're like, oh, right, yeah, that's the person that we helped out with blah, 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 right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I think the way it's written, there's potential to do that. But you could definitely just make it very straightforward by cutting. I'm obviously trying to provide suggestions on making it a richer experience, but you you absolutely don't need any of that.
True.
You can just go to the temple. They're like, yeah, I was mugged.
Yeah.
Here, you left this on me. Thanks. And
Yeah.
then you move on, right? So.
Yeah. Good point.
Okay, so the pendant, it's a clenched fist squeezing a drop of blood, which is metal, right? Which is pretty odd. Metal in the rock metal. It's a super metal thing. It's not actually made of metal.
Yeah.
And this requires a little bit of research, but I think you just have to make a gather information check effectively.
Yeah.
But one of the things about the setting is that in the hills outside of the city of Greyhawk are a bunch of ancient tombs, and this symbol is associated with one of them. So anybody learned in the city would be able to point the PCs towards the appropriate tomb, which is the
Tomb of Blood Ever Flowing.
Yeah. Awesome dungeon.
Yeah, good dungeon. I think you just enter and there's a blood fountain or something in the first room, but it's not that hard to figure out that there's bumps on the back of the pendant that you have, and they slide into a slot in the room, and it opens the actual entrance to the tomb.
Yeah, it's the key, so you need the pendant.
And then you enter the dungeon.
It's awesome. It's an undead. It's chock-a-block full of undead and blood everywhere. So like the entire place just has that coppery metallic tang of blood everywhere, and it's real blood. Like it's there's necrotic energy everywhere. And what I really enjoyed is that there's giant pools of blood that undead just pop out of nonstop.
Yeah.
So you're just being ambushed left, right, and center by, not super scary undead. It's skeletons and zombies and that type of stuff. But the fact that they could be anywhere gives the appropriate sort of paranoia that I feel is healthy to have to a certain extent for your PCs.
Yeah, I like the dungeon. It had a great theme, and you're just kind of like, it was short and sweet almost. You're constantly pestered by undeads, and it's got like the corpse rat swarm, which I thought was like awesome. Just like a little tweak to something, which made it cool. And the skeletal owl bear, I don't know, it's down there, but I thought that was like kind of fun. We talked about dungeon ecology before, and it's like one of our favorite things. And
I love that the skeleton owlbear has a name. It's the Blessed One. Right?
Yeah, and like another thing that I like is that there's not just out of place things here, you know. It's like you don't go into a room and all of a sudden you're like, well, now there's goblins in here because they've been living in here, and
they're allies of the
undead.
cleric.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you feel satisfied like being in this dungeon and moving through, and the theme is just good. So
the blood dripping off the walls and in pools and undead everywhere. It's thematically sound, and I did.
And I think there's like hints of like what the skeletons are all missing a hand, and you know, if they had eyes, they would be missing an eye as well. But the Vecna theme is there as well. And I think nothing is more satisfying than being in a place that you're supposed to be in. You know, it feels like it's a temple of Vecna.
And it's, in my opinion, the perfect length for a dungeon, right? I'm generally of the opinion that most dungeons should be designed for a single adventuring day.
Well, yeah, I mean, like, right? And that falls into our thing is like, you should be rested when you come here. It's short and sweet, and there's a bunch of stuff to run into, and then you're sort of in your action economy, right? Like, well, how much resources do you want to use to get, how many rooms do you think there are? And yeah, it should be short and sweet.
Well, it should be designed so the players shouldn't have to rest, right? I mean, if you have a dungeon that's long enough, it needs to make sense that the players can rest. And in certain like dungeon delves, it totally makes sense, right? You're just surveying the area. Who cares? There's no living, like, intelligent creatures in there. But this is a situation where if the PCs like attack and they're like, oh, I used all my spell slots, let's go camp outside, the call's just going to be like, we're gone. You know, they should just grab their stuff and leave. You have a narrow window of opportunity.
Or in lots of adventures, we move through the Tomb of Blood Overflowing, and then there's another door which has been sealed, and beyond it is where the orcs live that had a tunnel, you know. It's like there's always more in lots of dungeons, and less is more in dungeons.
This is the boss dungeon. This is where we've been dragged around all over this city. Your players might be a little frustrated because they keep finding hints but never the payoff. And this is the payoff, right? It's a creepy dungeon with lots of cool monsters. And then you make your way through it. And then there is the bad guy. There is the cleric of Vecna, which should just get murked, right? Like it's not supposed to be challenging, I guess. Like it's not getting to... This is one of those situations where like getting to the boss should hopefully use enough resources that your players aren't showing up fully powered and ready to go. Because if you rest and have full hit points and all of your spell slots and everything, then you're just going to show up and be like, fireball, 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 we win, right? Like it's going to be over in a heartbeat. But I think
like one of the things I also like about this adventure is that there's not some like big nasty bad at the end. It's like a servant of something that he believes in. And it's just like a dude out there doing evil things because he believes in it, and it like makes the world feel a little bit real. That there's just bad people out there and they're trying to, you know, summon nasties, but it's not like you run in the end and there's like a half summoned undead dragon that all of a sudden you're fighting, which is like, okay, we did all this real stuff and now we're just running into the dragon part of the Dungeons and Dragons.
Exactly. It's evil and it's a bad guy, but yeah, it's not like we suddenly stumbled upon a world-ending ritual, right? Like you save the day, but it's not a big save, right? Like it's not. And I do feel sometimes adventures get to be a little one note, right? You're always trying to save the world, right? And that gets to be a little boring.
And he's just kind of in it by himself, you know? It's not like he's got a party of 5 with him that are, you know, oh, we're all here for this guy. He's just kind of out there doing it on his own.
Well, because they're gone, right? That's the one thing I really liked about how this adventure ends is, okay, you should win. You should kill the guy. Like, you'll fight to the death, you know, because he's, you know, a loyal servant of his god, et cetera, et cetera. But what you'll find is the book that cannot be opened has been opened. Right? You find the key that can open anything.
That can no longer open anything.
That is the one thing I didn't like about it, is you find the key separate and it looks the same. It's just not magical anymore, which I found unsatisfying. If I did this adventure, I'd have it in the lock and just be like all melted and fused, like the magic's Yeah, because it's an artifact, and the idea when you look at like how you destroy an artifact, if you have an artifact, a key that can open anything, well, how would you destroy it? You open something that can't be opened, and then I would just have it all twisted metal together and be like, oh, make it more clear that like it's
like
broken.
The priest's hand like rotted off when he opened the book, because it's like a book of necromancy too.
That would actually be awesome if his hand was all like scarred and burned or something like that, and there were scorch marks on the book that the players find afterward, like to sort of just tie that all together. That would be a cool sort of visual thing to include. And then the book, what is it? The book's written in Draconic, so your players may not know what it is initially, but from skimming it, you can see that it's a necromancy book, like you were saying, about the creation of unique, scary undead monsters, and a lot of pages have been ripped out of it.
Yeah,
and that was for me. It was like, yes, like that is an amazing hook, because literally the rest of your campaign could be trying to put out the fires that are started every time one of these pages crops up, right? You could imagine a world where these pages are now disseminated out to separate cells of the cult of Vecna, and they use the information to start raising undead monsters. So suddenly, there's an outbreak of ghouls in this town, and you go track down the ghouls, and again, it's the cult, and then mummies somewhere else, and because undead, there's a million different types of undead, so you can now have where's this vampire? You can totally set it up where a local ruler has been behaving weirdly, and you get sent to investigate, and you find out that he's now a vampire because his. And
it could be good that like you could play it in the beginning, and you're just like campaign lore that like undead don't exist, and this is the first sightings of undead in millennia or centuries, right? They were lost to old civilizations, and then they're being rehashed. Then there'd be reasons to go and explore these undead instead of just being like, well, they're just everywhere anyway because of undead.
And it's scalable, right? So you can go all the way up to suddenly a Dracolich and all of that type of stuff. So I thought that was really fun that you could easily turn this into an ongoing campaign. And for me, any adventure that gives me sort of like future adventure fuel is fantastic. Right? Because that's what I'm looking for. I'm running a published adventure. I'm just looking for ideas. And this one I thought was really nice because of that, because it's an easy, pretty straightforward first level adventure, right, that you can spin out into anything you want, right? There's a million adventures out there that are related to undead. You tweak it a little bit and you just turn the necromancers into Vecna cultists, and suddenly it's all connected back to this original one. I'm trying to think if there's anything else specifically about the ending. You don't get any money. Right?
Well, you can sell the library, I think, will buy the book from you just for their curiosity's sake. Like, it's lost its powers, I think, but now that it's opened, they're like, oh, we've never been able to open this book. We'll buy it back from you so we can study it. And I think you can maybe get a couple $100 gold from it or something. So.
Yeah, well, I'd consider it more of a reward for return. Than you steal something and sell it back to them.
We found your book.
Super okay.
But you don't end this with any like significant amount of wealth, which is probably good.
But I think it's appropriate for, if you're running this for first level players, you shouldn't suddenly be throwing out giant magic items nonstop. But overall, I thought it was pretty cool. As from an investigation standpoint, I thought it was well done. There's multiple hints, right? It's not a one note thing. You can't. It's difficult to get stuck or lost. I also did kind of like that because there's no real timeline in here. Like, you could run it on a short timeline, or you could run it on a long timeline. So you could literally have this going on at the same time as another adventure, right? So you could be doing parts of multiple adventures at the same time and interact between the two of them and bounce between them without having to be a laser focus. Right. So I thought you could do some pretty fun things with merging this with an ongoing separate adventure.
Yeah. Is there a reason why the priest is in the tomb?
No.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that's like maybe the only plot hole is like, why wouldn't he just be in his apartment reading the book?
Because Vecna's bad.
Yeah.
And they needed to set their temple somewhere.
Yeah.
and it's metal, man.
Yeah.
There's blood on the walls.
Yeah, true.
It's hardcore. It's it's also suffused with necrotic energy. So if you're going to raise undead, that probably
Helps.
plays a role, in it. I mean, it's just cool. Like, it doesn't really have anything to do with anything.
Yeah.
It's just
Insert cool area.
Honestly, if nothing else, that is a great little dungeon to steal. And if you're feeling lazy and you need an end dungeon from whatever little arc you're doing, just drop that in there, because thematically it's fantastic.
True.
And you can scale it fairly easily by just changing what type of undead you're dealing with.
Yeah.
Right. Swap the skeletons out for something a little scarier, and it works just as well.
I would run it. I really like this adventure. I thought it was fun to read. It made sense most of the time. And I think the things that didn't make sense are easily fixable. So yeah, I'd run it.
Oh yeah, it's fantastic. I think as written, you can totally run this no problem. It's a great low level adventure. And straightforward enough and interesting enough that, like, I think it would make a good example of what D&D can be, right? Because it's not one note, right? It's very much a situation like you'd be asking your players, what do you want to do now?
Yeah.
A lot.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of fun, right? It starts right off the bat with a fight, and then it completely opens up into exploring the world, interacting with the idea. And for new players, getting that into their head where, like, you can do what you want early and often is kind of useful as an example.
Yeah, it's a good pocket adventure for those, because I think it's hard sometimes. Like, well, you're in the city, and then people are like, well, what the hell are we supposed to do in a city? And then you have this random encounter that you can turn it into something else, so which is nice. As always, I think we're done with this one. Yeah. Thanks for listening. You can email us at theimpandogre@gmail.com or hit us at the Twitters at theimpandogre.
We're pretty lazy about checking all that stuff, so we'll get to you. We'll answer eventually.
Yeah. We've reviewed some adventures that were suggested to us by previous listeners, so if you have something else that you want us to take a look at, we'll jump that to the front of the queue and try to get it to it as soon as we can. Thanks for listening. Next week we tackle The City That Dripped Blood by Frog God Games. Thanks.